Next up, folks, is Caroline Dowling. She is our keynote, a highly experienced business leader with extensive global knowledge in the technology sector, specifically electronic, technical, and logistics services. She was, until she retired in 2018, the business group president of Flex, an industry-leading Fortune 500 company with operations in 50 countries. She led a $10 billion group of businesses, including telecoms, enterprise, compute, network, and cloud data centers, and responsible for managing the global services division, supporting complex supply chains and supply chain groups. She has so much experience, I actually can't give her all the accolades she's due. She's a non-executive director and board member on, I could go on and on, but actually I know people don't want to hear from me, they want to hear from you, Caroline. So really looking forward to hearing our chat. We'll be taking your Q&A with Caroline, so get your questions in on the stage tab on the right-hand side, and I'll get to them after you hear from Caroline. Caroline, over to you.
Much, Jonathan, much appreciated. And of course, my thanks to Gillian. What an inspirational start for our day when we think about the 3 C's in terms of curiosity, courage, and commitment. So a lot going on. Bear with me because I want to just share a few slides with you. And let me do that just now. So good morning. Thank you, Jonathan, again.
In the system, Caroline.
Okay.
There you go.
My apologies. Thank you. Well, good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about innovation by connection this morning. And I'm taking a little bit of a different angle on this that might surprise you. But anyone familiar with Steve Jobs will be familiar with the concept of innovation through connection. Some debate, he may not have invented anything. I'm not here to discuss that. I am, however, he was a master at imagination. His ability to innovate through technologies that already existed and services, to me, was astounding. Toppling large mobile businesses, taking companies, and entirely disrupting the music industry. The concept is simple. It's taking known parts and putting them together to operate differently, to create we did not know we wanted or solve an unknown problem. This is accomplished by connecting people from different areas with different expertise that think differently together. That level of inspiration is embedded in Apple's DNA, a company that asks the smart questions. You have to reflect for yourselves on how you where does it belong in your organization? Is it particularly with the R&D group only, or is it broadly across your company? And also to imagine what the next decade will look like in your business and to think on these questions. As author William Gibson famously said, the future is already here. It's not evenly distributed, not yet at least. So today I want to share 3 thought streams with you. How is the global economy shaping up and why it matters to us? Secondly, technology and history and why that matters. And finally, what are we doing today to continue to thrive in this fast-changing environment? So before we discuss innovation by connection a little bit more broadly, I think it's important to widen our lens and take a quick tour around the world on the major economic and thematic trends. A broad economic recovery continues to. The OECD leading indicators are pointing generally towards a rebound, particularly in China and the USA, where we expect, to exceed 2019 GDP by the end of this current quarter. We will also likely return to open up. But of course, that in itself prevents the countervailing story to this tragedy we've been living this past 18 months, as now other regions of the world continues to rise. It's also the first time in history that we've experienced 85% of the world's GDP because of this pandemic. And it's equally the first time in history that we may a K-type recovery. I mean, some businesses will continue to thrive while others will not recover at all, in particular what we're seeing in high street retail, some small SMEs. Equally, we find ourselves in an interesting time where populist politics continues to rise in some areas and plateau in others. We continue to see an unprecedented influence of international government policy in the direction of technology strategy, in the direction of global investments, in tax, in trade, and in the movement of funds itself. I expect the results of the OECD-led discussions on unified tax bases, China's on acquisition, and advanced technology leadership, and the US's relatively new trade barriers, along with the potential $6 trillion stimulus and the European Union's $2 trillion stimulus, are meaningful shifts in global business and political pattern. And I think we will not see the results of that for a few years yet. And at a time where technology continues to grow far faster than public policy can assimilate and address, with that gap widening, in my view, there is no doubt that international policymakers will continue to move to protect their national interest, perhaps regulating cryptocurrency and continued adjustment to free trade, among others, and equally to look to protect their customers and consumers. But in the end, and in a free market environment, I think it will not alter the course of technology, perhaps other than impact short-term capital allocation. And despite the ongoing impact of COVID-19, Ireland continues to attract well above average foreign direct investment, the highest per capita in the EU, and the IDA for us continues to do a stunning job. And global economic prosperity continues to recover. Interest rates remain low, and there's a ton of capital. The last time I looked, I think there was $9 trillion in private equity looking for a home. And of course, the continued acceleration and adoption and introduction of digital technologies is rife, which segues nicely into the next agenda, which is technology and history. So over the centuries, GDP per capita has accelerated because of some of the world's great technology advances. Early industrialization occurred during the 19th century. First, increasing productivity, and then, of course, later the steam engine enabling cross-border trade. This doubled real GDP growth over the next 100 years. And now we fast forward into the next century, the century of the age of electricity, Henry Ford's car. That doubled GDP in just 40 years. And now more recently to the 1970s, I guess the age of information, the age of compute. That lifted, I think, around 700 million people out of poverty, and it increased GDP by 2x in just under 25 years. You get the trend. We go from 100 years down to 40 years to double GDP, then to 25 years. So the speed of acceleration and adoption is enormous. But we're here today where we are now well and truly into the digital revolution and the age of renewable energy, led by secular technology shifts. So when I started out many decades ago, I actually worked with Gillian's dad. Alibaba, was a character in a book, Apple of Fruit, and Amazon continues to be the rainforest. And indeed, today, who would have thought that a social network company, Facebook, an internet search engine, Google, and a bookseller, Amazon, would be among the catalysts that enable the shift of infrastructure to the cloud? Just one decade, we see how technology has evolved. If you take cloud, for example, which to me is a great catalyst for digital, the FANGs and the BATs now support circa 80% of the open standards. They've invented assistants such as Siri or Alexa, and I believe that by 2024, it's forecast that there will be more voice on search. Alexa now has, or Amazon now has, an Alexa type device activated every 60 seconds. So if you can use your imagination and think what million recording looks like. They've adopted bots and analytics to upsell and feature user demands. They use artificial intelligence and or machine learning to execute with speed and accuracy. And we're now seeing Amazon and Google shift their attention to healthcare. Alibaba, Shopify, Amazon continue disrupting broad retail and advertising. They're moving to healthcare, to Whole Foods, to drone deliveries, and they're not finished there. They're seeking not just to dominate consumer, but equally large global businesses. And they've created a $5 trillion market cap in just under 1 decade. And in 2020, we're going to see esports will enter the Paris Olympics for the first time. And this is driven by the Zillennials. And I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about Zillennials. I think it matters for us. By 2025, there will be 2 billion genomes sequenced at around $100 an event, giving way to preventative treatment, enabling people to avoid disease by shifting how they exercise, by shifting their diet. Where today, 97% of our treatment. We will see 2027 be a year where oil will peak. And perhaps we get 50% of new car sales in EV. The speed of mass is incredible. If we think over the last 150 years, the telephone was invented in the 1870s. It took over a century before landlines reached a saturation point in the advanced economies. So why was adoption so slow? I expect we all understand the massive amounts of infrastructure that had to be put, cables laid, towers built, networks accumulated, if the product accessible for consumers. Furthermore, the telephone suffered a last mile problem in expense versus return. And we roll on 150 years and we see a similar challenge in Ireland and in multiple other countries. Same issue, one where the logistics get tougher and expensive to solve for access and latency. And it sounds familiar to a lot. So today's last mile problem seems to be an unsurmountable one. And for us, for a true digital economy and for fair working from home and fair business practice, we must solve it faster than we're doing. Which brings me to disruptors like Tesla. It's created, the first compute car, the fastest, safest SUV in the world. It's coupled it with their solar charging stations and, of course, mega car batteries, unsettling an entire automotive industry. And now Elon Musk, alongside his space travel, has turned his attention to satellite broadband for rural. And as I sign up for this new Starlink program, I am hopeful to get more than 5 megabit downloads at my home. Innovation, in my view, is the future. It's innovation through connecting existing technologies and using them to solve problems. This past year, we saw pharma collaborate, and even some of them share their IP to get us a vaccine in under 12 months, something we're incredibly grateful for, but it has never before been done. And of course, the past stage adoption of digital that would in normal times have taken maybe 5 to 6 years. So clearly, we're not afraid to adapt our ways of working and to adopt new technologies, and we do so fast. So therefore, it's no surprise that if we hear the rate of change outside your house is faster than the rate of change inside, then you need to be careful. So the key learning for me is the speed of change. If you're at the top, there's no guarantee you get to stay there for very long. Some of you may remember the Nortels, Alcatels, Lehman Brothers, and more recently H&M. They all fell. The average lifespan of an S&P 500 company is now less than 15 years because of that speed of change. But if you're starting out, there's never been a better time. The number of startups have quadrupled over the last 2 years, and there's a ton of cash available in the market to support you. And it's a busy road with lots of opportunity. Renewable energy presents an incredible opportunity as our economies across the globe start to recover. We're witnessing hydrogen, wind, solar, battery storage, EVs, geothermal, and so on. I referenced earlier about keeping our lens wide, the tax and trade political wars in particular. The 20th century biggest influencer in trade and indeed war were, and I would put it to you that the 21st century will be the century of the electro-states or the techno-states. I anticipate this could well mobilize large governments focused into a climate war. As you know, China dominates the solar industry today with over 70% manufacturing for global needs. The EU is the wind powerhouse, where 8 out of 10 of the world's largest renewable energy companies are European. The USA is lagging somewhat, but as we equally know, they for us to see if these allies will unite with a stronger together approach. It's unlikely, but it would be a meaningful shift if this were to happen. Distinctly, we're on the edge of a tipping point and experiencing one of the most world-altering movements in human evolution. Not just digital or connected things, providing access to intelligent data, of course, but we're now seeing heart catheters with embedded sensors measuring blood pressure, among other things. We see artificial assistants helping surgeons review global advancements in their field, where if they were trying to keep up with everything across the globe, they would have to read for 140 hours a week, versus an IBM Watson, for example, which can analyze that with more accuracy than the human brain in under 3 minutes. We're embedding sensors not just for the advanced urban economies, but equally for the poorest regions of the world. And that's a great example of one they worked with the Malaysian government, where they increased the yield of the rice field. We're seeing it in our homes, where we see energy management with reductions of up to 50% by smart technologies. So the advantages are expansive. Perhaps it truly is a revolution of intelligence, are connecting, managing our energy consumption and improving our quality of life and our health. So this new era requires a rethinking and remaking of goods, of services, processes, and products that surround us. It really is a paradigm shift in solutions, delivering a connected, perhaps a greener world. And it's changing the way we live and communicate, the way we collaborate in business, in technology. And perhaps I would suggest to you it's even moving us towards co-opetition. Those that not just survive but will win will be the ones that combine resources and associates to innovate, design and engineer products faster, products that integrate with intelligent systems and in ways that demonstrate values to customers. We all know creating a $4 trillion economy. We know it's not only smart and connected machines or devices. We know it's a fusion of technologies and that this is not a cyclical shift, but it is a secular one. It's creating opportunities in healthcare and medical and biological, power, energy management, to name a few. And it's already disrupted the physical layer of infrastructure itself, with more open consortia and standard collaborations now in existence than any other time in history. So what does that mean for us? William Ward once said, the pessimist rather complains about the wind.
And
the optimist will expect it to change. The realist will adjust the sails, which has at this time. We've seen the speed of technology adoption increase in 1 year well beyond our imaginations, and markets in the trillions being created. The pace of change is relevant, whether you are a product provider, a service provider, or a software companies. According to 70% of the brands we will use by 2030 do not even exist today. So these secular shifts are fast and they're enabled by creativity. And it's a great time to be a startup.
Caroline, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. If you wouldn't mind just turning off the camera, you're just we're dropping out a tiny bit, just a second. So don't worry, it's just recently. So if you turn off your camera there, we can hear you loud and clear and see the slides.
Sure. Sorry about that. Is that better? Thank you. The possibility to invent in this era is unlimited, and I would put to you that it is best achieved by creating something that doesn't try to compete with an existing product or service by being cheaper or by doing it faster, but by competing with combining technologies that deliver doesn't even know it once, such as what Tesla did for the car or Apple did for the iPad, or by breaking protected markets through open standards like CORD and RAN do this. It's hard to get there. So what do we do? So for me, you start with the basics in terms of what you have and look to your smaller wins. And then you go faster. You build agility within your culture, because wait and see is likely a formula for failure. So build the organization for speed and unshackle it, allow it to create multiple spin-in teams to go experiment, allow them to fail and fail fast and start all over again. So we're truly in a full force of another industry and what I would say is a youth revolution. We see continued economic growth in a world being hungry for data and content. And at its heart, it may dramatically alter social fabric work. And to that end, I want us to spend a few moments on jobs and the Generation Z, the Zillennials, 1996 to 2016. I think it's important for companies to reflect on what that means for their future. This is the first generation born into a pure online world, adjusting to the online world. That you're seeing the older generations following or transforming to Generation Z behaviors through technology. And if we were to even refer to Generation Z being defined by events, we do not remember life before Google, social media. They do not remember life before 9/11. Remember the financial crisis, and they grew up in it. In the midst of social movements such as the LGBT and Greta Thunberg, and of course now the pandemic. So Generation Z are sustainability warriors. Activism will be their priority in climate and social, and I think we've only seen the start of that with the climate protests, Robinhood, Wall Street in last January. They more likely consider themselves citizens of the world versus their own national interest, and they typically don't trust Wall Street. They have a much higher propensity to save money. Cryptocurrency, financial apps, and automated banking are automated traditional bank. They're insular online and they prefer goods over experience. A visit to the Taj Mahal or Blarney Castle is less attractive than something like an online avatar type experience. 50% of Americans don't have a driving license today, and that's the first time in history. We can expect gender fluidity to grow. Male grow, over 50% are open to makeup, 99% of them are online consumers. They wear secondhand goods like a badge of honor, and they watch 2x more esports than traditional TV and media. And their role model is more likely to be the world champion of Fortnite versus Magic Johnson or Ronan O'Gara. They've got different challenges to previous generations where our challenges of the day would have been drug, alcohol, teenage pregnancy. The challenges of the time for Generation Z are very different. It's anxiety and it's loneliness. Obesity. And for the first time in the EU during 2020, we now have more 65-year-olds than we have. And in the US in 2021, that's also going to be true. 90% or nearly 90% of Generation Z are in emerging markets. So I think it's important for you to pay attention to these shifts as context has changed. In an age of state capitalism versus shareholder capitalism. And I think it's important for companies to pay attention to that shift. So in conclusion, in terms of the big picture and why we care, so there'll be continued explosive growth and every device will have access directly built into it. Network capacity and of course, importantly, security will need continuous investment and remain top of mind for us. But we're witnessing digital and renewable energy disrupt business and business models. Find its way to the largest pool of inefficiency. So I think perhaps some of the next big moves to address this inefficiency will be around the following. The 20th century was about the petrostates. The 21st century is about the electro or technostates. Trillions of dollars of investment. So use your imagination to think what Paris Accords achieved and how that may affect your business. Rare minerals will most likely become the diamonds of this next decade. Healthcare will continue to exponentially grow in digital. Education needs to redefine itself, and I expect we can anticipate there should be new competition coming into this. Housing shortages in urban areas will continue, and this is not just an Irish problem, it's actually a global problem. and it needs a complete rethink to handle mass migration to our cities. While we see the rural populations decline for the third decade in a row, we really need to understand how we can solve broadband faster. Supply chain disruption will continue with our weather patterns. We can plan for a 2-week disruption every 18 months and perhaps up to 3 to 4 months every 3 to 4 years. The need to create wholly sustainable food, water, and energy resources remains top of mind, and plant-based foods become a reality for us. Crypto, and we're moving to a contingent workforce and shortage of key skills. The top skills for me will be around digital, of course, but equally creativity. And finally, I think the zillennials will enter the workforce, and companies must figure out how to embrace them and adapt to their expectations. So overall, from a technology perspective, it's a really great place to be. And perhaps as you review your strategy, we should go back to basics and our creative children that we were in play school and in the kindergarten. So use your imagination, and to me, that's about envisioning what the future could look like and adjust your strategy to fit this. Simplify, reduce the number of SKUs, reduce the complexity. Share your toys in the industry. Remember to keep the best toys in your room, that is to protect your IP. Your best friends, your trusted partners. And finally, remember to ask the smart questions that inspire to innovate. My thanks to the entire team at IT Cork and for such a wonderful TechFest. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Caroline. You can stop sharing that screen now. Great, perfect, thank you. Really interesting, your description of how things have changed. And I find it crazy. There's a photograph that I often use in my talks of what the office looked like 100 years ago. And if we think, maybe it's 120 years ago now, but no radio, pretty much no one had telephones, there was no TV, no internet. I mean, just in my mother-in-law's, I actually won't say how much she'd kill me, but she has seen quite a lot, let me put it that way. And when you look at the transformation, I kind of liken it to being on a train where, because you're on the train, you don't realize how fast it's going. Because we've seen, the last iPhone, it looks pretty much like this iPhone. We don't realize how fast this technological change has happened in the past, couple of decades. As soon as you step off that train, you realize completely. And I think we've just a few minutes to get to questions. And this question is absolutely fantastic because it really hits the nail on the head. It says, with companies and employees having to reinvent themselves constantly to stay relevant, this constant drumbeat of innovate and be fresh and be at the cutting edge, how do we keep teams inspired and combat change fatigue? I think it's a great question.
Yeah, that is a superb question. Yeah, for sure. And to me, it's just allowing that flexibility to come into the organization where you give people downtime. And we used to create in Flex, we had this red time zone where you just had no meetings during those hours. And that was your time to breathe, reflect, and also just take time out, right? And get out of that environment for a period of time. And equally, allow people to get into areas, even if you're the head of IT or the head of R&D, whatever functional responsibility you have, the opportunity to cross over so that they can learn what's going on in other parts of the business, because learning in itself is a huge motivator. So being able to, keep that lens wide. And I was quite deliberate today about, looking at our global economics in a very narrow way, but just having a look at what's going on across the globe. Looking at history and what we've learned from it, because all of those are motivating things once you understand them.
Yeah.
So I would encourage companies not to, don't put boxes around people. Take away the organizational hierarchical structure and let people.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. And I think, moving to this idea of matching people to their talent and their skills is a much better way than matching them to a role. Caroline, really interesting hearing from you. Thank you so much for your insights, and have a great day. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day.